Now we go. Secretary of State Marco Rubio warning that China remains one of the biggest challenges facing our country, but stresses the importance of avoiding conflict. Listen.
It's both our top political challenge geopolitically, and it's also the most important relationship for us to manage. I mean, it's a big, powerful country. It's going to continue to grow, but we're going to have interests of ours that are going to be in conflict with interests of theirs. And to avoid wars and maintain peace and stability in the world, we're going to have to manage those.
Joining me now, Vice President of Government Accountability Institute, Eric Eggers. And Eric, from what we have seen and heard so far, from the limited reporting, the readouts coming from the bilat so far, are we heeding Marco Rubio's words?
Well, I think the fact that Marco Rubio stated on the global stage that the United States, as official policy, is aware that China desires to be the largest and most powerful geopolitical force in the world is a significant step towards saying, listen, we know what you're trying to do. Todd, you just raised the point. Would China try to steal the technology from Jensen Huang's NVIDIA chips? I think being aware that they want to do that is such a stark departure from what the policy and mentality was under Joe Biden. So China being aware that we know what they want to do and we're here to try to stop them from doing that while still being a good partner in global commerce, I think is a significant step towards cooperation and prosperity for all.
And it's not just NVIDIA. We got a lot of tech CEOs there during these bilats. And, of course, intellectual property and China's stealing of it, a major concern. Here's more from Marco Rubio on that. Listen.
A lot of the advancements, not all, but a lot of the advancements you've seen in the commercial sector, in the industrial sector, in the technological sector in China is a product of intellectual property theft and or reverse engineering, which is the same thing, of our own technology.
Eric, is there any reason to believe that this time will be any different, that China will stop stealing our IP following the summit, even though, as we well know, Eric, that is literally their business plan? If they steal our stuff, make their own stuff cheaper.
I mean, they're going to steal our stuff. They're going to do whatever they have to do to cultivate relationships with our politicians, whether it's Eric Swalwell. Remember, they had, I think, Dianne Feinstein's driver was a Chinese spy. Obviously, we just saw a mayor in California who's admitted to working hand in glove with the Chinese Communist Party. So clearly, this is something that China's trying to do. But Todd, what I see on this global stage is I see President Trump arriving with a bunch of carrots and a bunch of sticks. The sticks are the implied pressure that the global oil prices and the rise that they're having and the impact on China's economy. So clearly China's incentivized to want to do business with the United States, but he's also arriving with all these carrots. Here's the best technology in the world as represented by the people who run these companies. We're here to do business with you. But again, to Marco Rubio's point, we're not being deceived. This is not Joe Biden asleep at the wheel pretending that you guys are just a partner in good faith. We know what you're trying to do. We're actively arresting some of your agents who are trying to do it, yet we still understand it's a huge market. And unlike Canada, who just decided to let Chinese cars be up to 20% of their auto market, we're going to protect American interests, to your last guest point, while still trying to do what's in the best interest of our companies. We want to do business, but it's got to be on our terms. And we're going to have hopefully some safeguards in place to keep you from stealing things that advance your own interest to become the largest power in the world.
You mentioned oil. Carly, in her last segment, talked to Rebecca Grant about the purchasing of oil. I want to go bigger picture, macro. Oil equals Iran. Let's boil it down to that, because that's what ultimately happens. Will China stop ultimately helping Iran? We know our CIA has indicated that they're going to deny it. And none of the readouts so far are really going into too much detail on Iran. Do you think that at the end of this, China will stop helping Iran, or is it going to be basically business as usual as the war probably continues?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And obviously, it's early days on this. I think that's certainly one of the key talking points, but it's one of many, right? You've got the Iran issue. You've got the Taiwan issue. Here at the Government Accountability Institute, we've done a lot of reporting on what China has done in the narcotics trade in the United States with their relationship with Mexico and the fentanyl trade. So I know that there's a number of things they're trying to get China to cooperate on. I think we have seen some positive movement. China is indicating from everything I've seen that they want to kind of take steps towards us. But to your point, this is something that China's been doing for a long time. So I would say any concessions China's willing to make on the Iran issue should be seen as positive and a change in what has been before.
Eric, on our screen, we are looking at a podium with flowers on it. This, of course, the scene of the welcoming banquet. We are awaiting the arrival of President Trump any moment right now. This is at the Great Hall of the People. We're going to bring in Carly here to ask you some questions.
The Great
Eric.
Hall of the People, where this banquet will be held coming up as the president wraps up his night. Of course, China 12 hours ahead of Eastern Standard Time here, so 5:50 p.m. in Beijing. And Eric, you know, as you guys were talking about the state of the economy and oil and what this whole entire summit could mean for the United States, one of the things that should also be focused on is the economic situation in China and the fact that this country is one with a shrinking middle class and one that in 2024, 15.2% of the population lived on less than $8.30 a day. China's economy grew at 9% for years, and now just last year it grew at 5%. So how does all of that play into this conversation as the president meets with Xi Jinping, Eric, about the economy and a heavy focus on business ties, and does that at all give the United States any sort of edge over conversations?
Well, and Carly, remember this, like we have to take China's word at it based on those numbers that you just said. And there's been significant questions raised about how truthful and viable the economic numbers coming out of China are and how much can we trust them, because some of these numbers actually in the agencies that report these numbers, sometimes they just disappear. So, yeah, and unlike in China, in the United States, when you have economic problems, you hear about it from the people who are suffering. But because of China and the Communist Party and the censorship that they have enacted on their people, you know, you're not going to hear the complaints of those middle class from those numbers you just said. So I do think that the pressure is real, although China does a good job of trying to suppress it because it would weaken their leverage in conversations like this. But no, absolutely. And I would say if there's one thing President Trump understands, and he's demonstrated both in this term and his previous term, it is leverage. I think that's the best way to understand and interpret everything he tries to do on both the political and global stage. He's collecting leverage points and he's using it strategically to try to advance interests of his administration and ultimately the American people. But it's a key point. But the numbers actually in China could be even worse than what you just said.
Right now, as we await President Trump's arrival at the Great Hall of the People, many members of his administration already in the room. So far, we've seen Stephen Miller, Pete Hegseth, Scott Bessent. And as the camera pulls out, we will certainly see more. Let's circle back to what Cheryl Casoni was talking about earlier. These NVIDIA chips, second most powerful NVIDIA chips, going to be sold to 10 Chinese firms. Is this a good idea, Eric?
Well, I don't think President Trump thinks it's a bad idea. Otherwise, he wouldn't let Jensen Huang get on the plane in Alaska. So this is obviously something that's happening with the implicit understanding and permission of Donald Trump. And I do think, just to kind of zoom back out, you talk about having a macro perspective. The fact that Marco Rubio is saying, listen, we understand what China's plan is. That is such a fundamentally different posture than what it was under Joe Biden. You know, we kind of broke the story about Hunter Biden and his business deal with this $1.5 billion joint venture with the Chinese Communist Party. And at the time, you know, Joe Biden, who was the vice president, it was like, well, of course Hunter Biden's doing it. He's just a good businessman. We now know, no, that was part of China's strategy of elite capture. So China's going to do whatever they can to gain access to U.S. markets. At least in this instance, in my opinion, I think they're coming through the front door by doing business with one of the top American companies, as opposed to going through the back door of, you know, kind of fomenting relationships with American politicians and having nefarious deals, whether privately, like with Eric Swalwell, or, you know, with the Arcadia mayor, or other ways, right? I mean, China has clearly been engaged in espionage on a number of fronts. At least if they're doing business, there's going to be some safeguards, there's going to be some transparency, and you got a lot of eyes on it from a regulatory standpoint and elsewhere.
Yeah, you know, Eric, one of the issues that we haven't talked about yet in this hour is the issue of rare earth minerals. It's a big one because they're, of course, essential to manufacturing here in the United States. And man, does China have a stranglehold over a majority of them. In October, Xi postponed a measure to restrict the exports for a year. There's been some talk maybe they'll expand that. But I think the overall bigger question would be, can the United States become less reliant on China when it comes to rare earths?
That's clearly a goal of President Trump, because obviously, yeah, you don't want to be dependent on China for, and you heard Scott Bessent talk about this as soon as they took over in the second administration. You don't want to be reliant on China for lots of different things. They learned that lesson under the coronavirus. We're relying on them for a lot of the biomedical devices that we needed to kind of respond to that pandemic. And oh, by the way, I heard your segment earlier. There's a new virus potentially growing off the shore of a ship, right? So we don't want to be dependent on China for lots of things, including rare earth minerals. But going back to the whole, we have carrots and we have sticks. So I think one reason why China has suspended their desire to not sell us those rare earth minerals is because of all the carrots that you see on screen right now. There's lots of different incentives for them to want to do business with us. They want to be a good partner, and restricting our access to things we need is not going to advance their agenda or ours.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.